Wayne Cunnington, welcome to Weird Sauce. Thank you for welcoming us from your location in the United Kingdom. Could you kindly introduce yourself for our audience?
Yeah, my name's Wayne Cunnington, 53 years old. I currently don't work. Obviously, the AstraZeneca vaccine injury kind of put paid to changing my life. But I still compose music, and it's something that's I've done for many years, and I'm glad to actually be able to enjoy doing it again.
So, so that we can contextualize the conversation we're going to have, I discovered your story through Twitter,
Mhm.
X now, and then I sort of dug out a little bit more into YouTube and stuff like that. And so I got myself familiar with this essentially because of the issue related to excess mortality, excess morbidity in the UK. And also having many friends and colleagues who work and live in the UK and work in the NHS, I had best way to put it is informal conversation with people who were both who suspected they were vaccine injured or then got confirmation they were vaccine injured, and people who were seeing a lot of things that they hadn't seen before in their career. So that's the context in which I got to know a little bit about. But I would love for you to get into the story of what happened, before this entire thing unleashed, so that it helps people understand the nature of that conversation after that. So comes 2019 or early 2020 for you. What happened? And tell us the story of that.
Yeah, it was a crazy time. I was working for a food retailer and dealing with that whole madness of distancing and things that didn't make sense about masking. We obviously protested daily about this ridiculous whole thing, but something that you just had to get on with. My mum got very ill start of 2020, and she was in that hospital because this is kind of where it really came from. And through the repeat DNRs and the mistreatment, which has been clear from the medical records, she was fast tracked onto these end of life protocols, but which I didn't know, and they never actually informed me of this. They just do it. And the day after I last spoke to her, it was about June the 1st, I think. Um, the WhatsApp video is on my Twitter, and I spoke to her, and she was speaking clearly. And the next day, she was on this protocol with a ventilator. I didn't know what was happening. Nobody informed me of anything at all. And a lot more has basically come out over the next couple of years of me looking through medical records. But because of the horrors of dealing with that and kind of getting sucked into the whole hysteria COVID fear campaign, I stupidly got my AstraZeneca vaccine in February the 22nd, 2021. I'll admit, I don't think I thought too much about the whole thing going on with the vaccine rollout because of the pressures I was dealing with, dealing with that what happened to my mum. So much mystery at that time because I didn't know fully all the ins and outs. My father was ill. And then just trying to keep working because we were seen as the essential businesses to operate. And so all I saw was daily fear campaigns thrust at me, whether I was in store or sitting at home trying to relax after a hard day, and seeing the whole thing play out on television. It was a chaotic time. The only chance I then got to kind of look back at it all was when I was sitting in hospital during my 11-day stay in early March, dealing with brain tissue damage. that had come as a direct result of having the AstraZeneca. It's known that they gave high blood pressure, obviously high blood clots as well. There's another one. Now, I was fortunate I didn't have a blood clot, but I did have the intense headache pressures to the extent that I was delirious. I could barely walk. Doctors wouldn't listen to me. And until the very last moment of my constant barrage of them over a week or two, they said, well, you're not making much sense, so come to the surgery immediately. And then within me trying to stagger down the corridor, right, we'll call you an ambulance, just like that. Quite an intense ride that was, right from finally being listened to the paramedic coming in saying, well, we don't really know what's going on with you, but when you get to hospital, make out you're more serious than you are. I mean, here's me, I'm delirious. I can barely walk, barely talk. And they're telling me to make my situation seem worse. And then all of a sudden they take my blood pressure and it was 103 over 120. And they said, well, don't worry about it. You're serious. So it was that very surreal experience because I've never been that ill over the years or been into hospital much. And seeing this whole COVID fear pandemic thing play out in real time, because you laying there in A&E watching it all going on around you. And you could actually see then it was quite laughable because nobody really wanted to wear masks, even these people in such a serious position with a mask hanging around their necks. And I thought, well, that's odd straight away. 11 days of being poked, prodded, CAT scans, MRIs, lumbar puncture, of which was insanely painful. I mean, I've never had anything like that in my life. They couldn't, I think they had 3 attempts again digging a hole into my back. The first 2 were unsuccessful, and the third one was within like a 45-minute series of attempts. Never experienced anything like in my life, and I never will because the side effects I got from that alone. I've had issues with my neck ever since that. I mean, I was told on the ward that I would see MS in my future because of the damage to the brain lining. It's been a demyelination of the tissue. But what that also then does, it puts you at risk of other things like arthritis and you name it. And I've seen that happening over the last few years, all these other pains, all these other conditions coming through. So it was bad enough dealing with what I had before, from the brain fog to the palpitations, the arrhythmia to the neuropathy. It's been such a crazy time trying to get doctors to listen to me since, because they initially said, as they're wheeling me off to the hospital, we'll report your case to the yellow card system, which is the medical reporting system here in the UK. So there seemed to be an acceptance that it was linked to my vaccine then. The hospital doctors said, yes, it's definitely linked to your vaccine. Everybody was pretty much full on with it. But then within a few months' time, the narrative changed, and any attempt by them or anybody else to basically link something to a vaccine that was being rolled out was frowned upon. And so people were then being told to shut up, to change their story, and keep quiet. And I saw that straight away from my doctor. Basically, he was switching from this right to, well, maybe your symptoms are something else then. And just coming out of hospital and said, well, such as? He said, well, I'm going to put you on a urine test for 24 hours. I'm thinking, just one of many, many stupid things that were there basically to throw up any other possibilities because they were unable to carry on with this. Oh, well, this thing that's going to cause us some sort of problems with our regulators or our people who basically fund us.
For context of the international audience, let's just remind that you're talking about the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is since, if I'm not wrong, been removed or retracted, or it's invisibilized to some extent because it's just not available. Am I correct?
So AstraZeneca was pretty much withdrawn from use in Europe very early 2021, right about May, June time, because countries like Germany were seeing huge numbers of people with blood clots. And even in the UK, but UK kept trying to ignore it and keep covering it up. And I know so many people who have been on a show with Mark Stein talking about their blood clot issues from vaccines. So we kind of knew it existed then, but getting that story out to the media, they just didn't want to know. But although AstraZeneca made out that it was withdrawn from use in this country, it was actually still in use till early last year. Freedom of information request came by a friend, and it showed that it was still being given in this country. And even then, when they did finally withdraw it, they changed the name to Vaxzevria and then put it back onto market again. Changed the name, the exact same product.
So essentially, and you had one dose of this vaccine, or you had two doses?
Yes, I did. 22nd of February, 2021.
So only one dose.
Yeah.
And then the first period after which you immediately expressed symptoms was how long?
Oh, within hours.
Within hours.
Within hours, I went from thinking that, okay, I've taken something because I've been told it's going to kill Granny if I don't. I got hooked into that fear thing, like I said. And then within hours, I had this crazy headache come on, and I thought, wow. But it was so intense, so extreme. Everything I was taking or throwing at it just wasn't touching it. The regular paracetamol to ibuprofen or whatever. And obviously, then you need anything stronger, or like Nurofen, anything stronger, you then have to be prescribed. And I went to phone my doctor regularly because you just could not see doctors at that time because of this crazy fear thing going on. But they just kept saying, no, don't worry about it. It's just normal side effects. And I had this repeated back to me time and time again because they did not want to acknowledge that there was a problem with the vaccine. I had a look on one of these charts that somebody had abridged from all the results and all the data from the various vaccines. And at one time, I think I was at number 3 of the hot batches for vaccines for AstraZeneca. I think it's AB0012. There's so many people that I know, and they've also been in hot batches, and there's people who died. Because whatever the variation seems to be, it just seems to be so dramatic, so extreme. There's no way that your body can cope with it. I mean, I'm very lucky to still be here. You know, my life's changed now. I mean, I don't work anymore. I can't exercise. I can't enjoy walking. I used to be a bodybuilder. I used to love running around my park that's very close to me. I had to stop doing all that. I mean, I've tried again to go to the gym, but it just inflames my brain to such an extent. I ended up with double vision and all sorts of other neurological issues, and it just inflames it to a degree. I ended up wearing an ice cap for a few hours afterwards, just trying to calm things down. It's definitely not safe and effective, and it's insulting when our Prime Minister goes on to a streamed broadcast from Parliament last week in a direct attempt at Andrew Bridgen, who's an MP who's been fighting this cause, to highlight excess deaths worldwide that have been seen. And he storms up saying, no, they're safe and effective. It's insulting. It's incredibly bad taste at this stage. And it's only because of his pharmaceutical interests, I think, is the reason he's taking such a stance.
So so you get vaccine injured. I assume that your mother passed from the protocol that she was on.
Yeah,
and then
June the 8th.
Right. So you've at this point you vaccine injured, your mother passed, you then discover that the existence of the protocol probably was much more widely used than just the one case of your mother, I assume, because we had the same issue in France. So that protocol was used a different drug, but essentially was also used in France in care homes. Um, and then, so what happens then? What is it that you decide to do? You're gonna register your case with the yellow card. You're gonna try to get compensation. You're gonna try to get this information out. You're gonna try to get together with other people to get a voice out there. What is it that you decide you're gonna do?
I mean, right from very early 2021, when I came out of hospital, I thought, there's something I could do just to save others being in the same position as myself. Because at that time, I was being told I was the only one. It was rare, and I didn't know anyone else. And I wasn't even a Twitter user in any broad sort of sense. So I didn't see anybody else complaining of issues, injuries. But laying in my hospital bed for those 11 days, I had time on my hands. And I was shocked at some of the things I was seeing. And I couldn't believe the depth of lies that had been spread basically to create this whole fear narrative. So I had to think when I came out of hospital mid-late March about what I could do. And I just started to basically just tell my story on Twitter. Just a very small video, just a very short video, I've never been that sort of person to actually go onto social media and do sort of a seller product or that sort of, never been that sort of person. And it was emotional. But I thought anything that I could then do could hopefully make a difference. And quite bizarrely, within days and months, I'd gone from having just a few hundred people that I connected to on Twitter to, I think it was about 7,000 or 8,000 people. It was just crazy. And it was probably an awful time in a way because I just couldn't put the phone down. It's almost like I was addicted because I was connecting with so many people that were making a difference to me in helping me to keep going. But I was also then connected with others who'd also been injured. And I thought that was quite startling because you turn on the TV, you didn't see anything negative. It's like a whole new world. It's like you're thinking, well, what's happening here? It's like some bizarre thing that's been like a Twilight Zone scenario. And it was around about that time when I kind of looked more into what happened with Mum, because you have to bear in mind at that time I didn't fully know what had happened. No nurse had told me that we're going to put this protocol in place. Nothing had started. Nothing had been relayed to me. It all then really came out in the medical records. But there were certain things that I saw that didn't make sense. I saw a morphine driver attached to her wrist on the very last day. Now, bearing in mind, I couldn't visit over 7 weeks, pretty much hospital stays. She had a week in a care home, rushed back to hospital supposedly with COVID, although she was still talking to me fine on a phone call, on a video message. So I knew there was nothing seriously wrong with her. So of all that contact, I knew there were some things happening. I was very unhappy about certain situations, but then all of a sudden I was being allowed to visit once Mum was on a ventilator and the protocol had started. This is what I've then kind of judged later. So all those days watching Mum basically waste away. Because over 7 weeks, they'd pretty much not fed her, not really nourished her at all. In water, basic things like water. The arguments I had trying to bring in these high-calorie drinks that Mum should have been on because she had trouble eating. And they weren't interested. They just weren't doing it. And this is what was quite clear in the medical records. And so trying to deal with all that, and I thought, trying to get things clear in my head, I later that year, I started writing Substacks because I had so much in my head that I needed to get down, get out. For 5 months, I'd struggled to actually comprehend any sort of mental thought. And through desperation, I tried something called ivermectin, which so many people talk about. And within hours of me having some, it was like a veil had lifted off my brain, and I could start thinking again. I had all these thoughts and peoples and memories just flooding into my mind. I was laying down at the time, and I was quite scared by it. I thought, wow, what's happening? And so from that point, I then started looking in more to what had happened to Mum. I'd been speaking to absolutely anyone at the time, trying to share my thoughts of what happened, just to better inform people, because this is what was sadly missing with everyone who took these vaccines. We weren't better informed. We were misled. We were lied to. I had my information form given to me. I was in a drive-through having this vaccine. Yes, it's safe and effective and everything else. Give me the vaccine. Oh, and here's an information sheet, for your information, your concerns. So I didn't really take a notice of it, because who does? You have something, then you get a bump, bit of rubbish afterwards, and so you just don't listen. You don't look. But looking at that now, it's got crazy things like a monkey adenovirus as ingredients in it, and you think, what the hell did I put in me? But of course, at the time, it's all in small print. You just think, well, it's nothing really to be concerned about. So all these things you later kind of put together in your mind. You're trying to keep busy. You're writing articles and looking into things, going to various debates. Whenever I get the chance to go to something, I like to get involved so I can actually report on it as somebody who's been injured, as I have, get my views across if I can there, or put it into an article. So I feel like I'm helping change happen. Whether it does or not, it makes me feel like I'm part of society again, because for so long you feel like you've lost everything. And then all of a sudden things started to fall into place with looking into Mum. It took me 2 years to get her medical records. They just did not want to release them. I had to go through all sorts of hoops and games. And then finally they did last January. And from that moment, I knew with clarity everything that had happened was as I thought. Because by that point, I kind of knew what had actually been going on. But when you look into medical records, you actually look into the people that were there at the time, their thoughts, their ideas. And it's scary, because the mistreatment, the harms that were going on, not just to Mum, but this is one patient in a ward. It's then multiplied by numerous others. And you think, wow, these are family members. We trust them to look after our families. but they basically use an excuse that, oh, I didn't have time today, so your mother's gone without food. And it's like, you're relying on them to do their best. There are some great nurses, great doctors, and I will say that because I've seen them. There's people been made such a huge difference to me at my lowest ebbs. I mean, I was repeatedly back in hospital at the end of 2021, suffering shocking brain inflammation. When it hits, basically, like I did in early 2021, I had lower motor function. So I basically got no control of my limbs and everything else. And that was happening repeatedly because the injury was getting worse. And at that time, there was nothing put in place to try and control it. Doctors didn't know. And so the only way that I was getting action was by calling an ambulance because I've fallen down, I can't get up. So an ambulance would come and then pump you full of steroids and anti-inflammatories. And then within 24 hours, amazingly, you were starting to feel more human again. That happened 3 times over the weekend. And I was going in every day. Not because I wanted to, but because they just wouldn't put something in place to stop it happening. Sunday night, it was getting near midnight, and it was all kicking in again. And so I thought, oh my God, what do I do? So I called an ambulance again. I'm lying on the floor, I'd slid off my sofa because I'd lost all ability to keep upright. A paramedic came out who then preempt the ambulance coming out. What they do is they try to console the situation, ready for when their colleagues turn up. He basically carried out a very rudimentary look at me. He'd seen my discharge papers from that day in the hospital and basically said, well, I can tell you now, I'm not picking you up. I'm cancelling your ambulance and I'm going. And just left me lying there. I mean, how I'm still here, I don't know. I mean, I'm just one person. I've gone through whatever I've gone through. And there's been far worse cases than me. There's people who've died from these bloody vaccines within days. Such bloody horrible stories. But I'm still here. And that's the main thing, you know? We have to keep going. We have to keep talking. We have to keep doing as much as we can just to help others to feel they've got a voice to then help others stop these poisons being pushed out of people, you know.
So legally now, have you filed your case with the yellow card or the which is the equivalent of the VARS?
Yeah.
Did you take legal counsel? Is there a case pending? What's the legal situation now of your case?
So the yellow card system I filed, so the doctors actually filed before they taken me to the hospital. The neurologists in the hospital had actually said they were doing it as well. But because this narrative changed when I noticed when I came out of hospital in the March, April, I thought I had great doubts about whether anybody had actually done it. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to just do it myself anyway. It's very straightforward. And once you get a bit of back and forth conversation, it's quite easy. You can update your records, and then they verify it. So it's all quite honest. And I've updated them all the way through as well, because what I then found out with the vaccine damage payment system that is supposedly in place for people to claim compensation from an injury, it's almost next to impossible to actually get a payout unless you've actually died. I think there's only been one person who's actually got a payout. No, there's been a couple now. Somebody had actually lost a leg through the VIC condition, vaccine-induced thrombocytic thrombocythemia. But it's very rare that person who's still alive will actually get a payout. That's just how that system works. sadly. I mean, thousands of people have been rejected already. Um, I've lost, lost touch of how many appeals I've had now, but each one is probably a better one because I've been seeing more people. I mean, I had legal claims going very early 2021 with various solicitors groups that were interested in the claim. They said we've got a good chance of winning, but they want a bigger financial return, so they wouldn't take the case on, which is so maddening. At that time, the government didn't really want to acknowledge these injuries existed, and so it was so much harder for legal companies to actually feel they had a good standing. The vaccine damage payment system is still inept and useless as it is, but we have to keep working with it. We can put in these appeals, these all-party group investigations that the government do. Basically, if you do a petition on certain things, they will then look into it once you reach 100,000 people. So we've had various ones of those, not mine that I put in, but others have actually created them. And they've been very good. And I've been to a couple of these hearings. But the government's insistence that it's safe and effective time and time again knocks any chances of us actually getting anywhere. There are, I'll say class action, although it isn't actually at the moment. What it is, it's a hearing as part of the COVID inquiry for your cases to be heard. It's been recognised by the government's inquiry. The three main vaccine injury groups that there are in the UK have all been recognised by it, which is quite an amazing feat. The government's inquiry decided that they needed more information, more time to investigate these things more thoroughly, oddly. Because so far it's been going on as normal. But then all of a sudden in January they said, well, we need more time, we're going to delay it now till May or June. Which is strange because these parts of the inquiry all dealt with the vaccine injured and bereaved. As part of the briefs that I've seen from the solicitors group, it's all dealing with those uncomfortable questions of these ministers and government types that they've so far been able to come into an inquiry and get a very soft touch approach from the council on what they've done, what they should have done, and what was wrong. They just haven't pushed for those questions. Or when they have tried to, they've been told off by the judge saying, well, we're not going there. And it's just infuriating because they have had all the chance to create something that would give people the answers they need. Yet it doesn't. It just fails straight away. So that happens again May, June. This MP who seems to be fighting for all our causes, he fought so bravely for the post office scandal, the Horizon scandal, Andrew Ridgen.
Yep.
Obviously, he's now been stepping into the excess deaths and the vaccine injury for the last couple of years. He doesn't see it actually happening until after the election through various delayed processes. And you can see it happening because that's just so evasive. Whether it's Rishi Sunak standing there saying it's safe and effective or Penny Mordaunt, they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. They're all part of the globalist-led coup to install that agenda in place, and they just don't want to acknowledge any problems, sadly.
So what's the boots on the ground, so to speak, consensus that you feel within the population now? At least the sample that you can tap into of what has happened, what was this pandemic, and what was the logic of this intervention that seemed to have been not just in the UK, because you can see that the situation happened pretty much in all the Five Eyes country, almost in synchrony. So, and now we're seeing a lot of things unravel in the United States through class action lawsuits, through journalistic revelation on not just COVID, Pfizer, Moderna, the licensing of these uh, genetic, product, but also the NIH, funding mechanism, the gain of function, and bioweaponry, which again are all international subjects, and it seems that we've all been subjected, at least in the Western world and Western adjacent country, to a systematic protocol, whether it was the protocol of deciding what was this, and then the protocol of deciding what were going to be the countermeasure, and the protocol of lockdown, masks, social distancing, all this kind of thing. They seem to have been in absolute synchrony, which is unprecedented. So, what's interesting is, in hindsight, now you're saying at the time you were already very early on very doubtful about masks and about social distancing, and the fact that you were part of that group of workers that were deemed essential. And therefore, to me, when this started being, in healthcare, I just couldn't get my head around. So it's essential for them to die if it's that mortal. So we decided that they're worthy cannon fodder. The whole construct there seemed to me already flawed at the time, and that people with, the sort of computer class, if you'd like, or people who could do Zoom or whatever, all of a sudden they could sort of retire and sit there in their house, and that was okay. So if that was okay, they weren't essential. Those people doing jobs that, fed us and continue to have some modicum of circulation in society to keep everybody alive. Those people were at the same time essential to us, but essential in the sense that then we could expose them. That was completely paradoxical. And you've seen that early, and a lot of people couldn't see that early, and they still can't see it now. So now that there is a lot of counter evidence to the narrative that's coming out, not just in the UK, but internationally, what is your sense of what the population feels about what's happened to them?
Well, see, from here, 2020 was so mixed up. I did see all this happening, but I also then got hooked into things with that daily pressure, that daily fear being thrust at me. Because what I didn't realize was Mum was one of those thousands and thousands of people who were basically labeled as a COVID death, purely to hype that fear up. I didn't actually realize that's how things tied in with Mum and so many others. I didn't even know about I guessed it must be happening in other countries. I know the Liverpool Care Pathway protocol was actually adopted by pretty much everyone worldwide, with America relabeling it Obamacare from when he was in power, which I thought was quite disgusting. It's bad enough having a protocol that exists like that in the first place, but to name it after yourself, it's just insane, isn't it? I got to admit that in 2021, when I was dealing with this, we'd been having protests, but I wasn't aware of it in 2020 about all this craziness happening. But I got involved with Truth Be Told officially in January of last year. But I'd also gone to some of their worldwide freedom marches happening in London. And at the height of that, there had like several million people marching in a loop around London. So the strength of feeling at the time was that people were against all this agenda that was going on. No lockdowns, don't vaccinate children, let alone anybody else. So there was a very strong movement. And since then, it's only built, although the support hasn't been there since for this process, because people, they want to see action. And unless your MP, your media is going to suddenly start telling the truth, you don't feel like you're being heard anymore. So you kind of back off. And this is pretty much what happened in this country. But we have seen that huge surge back again about people not wanting to adopt the pandemic response treaty that WHO want to keep pushing, for example. That is still there, and that's been shown in Andrew Bridgen speaking in Parliament a few times. I don't know if you heard about his meeting in late last year in Parliament with Pierre Corey,
Yeah.
Robert
Yeah, I saw
Malone.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was very interesting, and it would have been an even bigger thing at the time if the government hadn't stepped in and actually ordered a dirty tricks campaign to basically switch off the cameras,
Yeah.
move the meeting to a different
Incredible.
room.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that shows the strength of their efforts in trying to shut down the narrative still,
Yeah.
attacks against the narrative. So we know it's happening. That's strengthening people's resolve to keep pushing on this. They were speaking again this week with Christine Anderson
Yeah.
in Parliament. And I saw the video for that last night. And there's another one today, I think, in Ireland. I've seen a clip somewhere.
Yeah.
So the fact that we are still speaking, because the WHO and WF won't just go away. They want all these agendas in place, and it's up to us to keep pushing on that. The strength's there, but we just need to raise it. I don't know. I feel buoyed seeing certain things happening. I'm interested to see how Tucker Carlson's conversation today, the thing is on about releasing it today with Putin.
Yeah.
I think that's going to set off a few sparks under people, and it's going to certainly wake things up a lot, because although a lot of people don't seem to see the bigger picture and how all these things are tied together, this could certainly put a rocket under it, I think.
And in your sentiment, I mean, I know apportioning blame is something that is both kind of sterile to some extent because it's not going to help much, but it's a human emotion. Do you apportion blame more onto the vaccine manufacturer, the pharmaceutical, the government, your government, versus sort of general organization like WHO, whoever funded these gain of function, whoever generated that virus, whoever either released it voluntarily or got it released by accident and then covered up? Do you have in your mind a sort of a really big guilt actor in there, or is it much more sort of global that there's so many different dark actors in this story, and so few that seem to be helpful to the truth, essentially not wanting to take camp, but simply wanting for truth to come out. If it was a mistake, then say it so we can correct it and it can never happen again. So these people didn't die or suffer in vain. If it was malfeasance, then say it, because then we're at war. Then the response is different.
Yes,
Then,
it is.
right. So what is your sense there of who's the most guilty of all, if anybody?
The people who have the money are the ones who are controlling everything. As soon as we remove funding from globalist organizations, these entities who are elected to control us, you remove the funding, you remove their power. It's a lot of rich people like Bill Gates, who have the billions behind them, and they basically see fit to control every aspect of your life for absolutely diabolical reasons. Then you look at the bigger picture, like Rothschilds and many other wealthy families, and it goes back a very long way. I mean, the gain of function thing. I mean, I find it incredible that it was happening in America. Obama found out about it and was supposedly shocked about it and said, not on American soil. So it then got shipped out to China, obviously, hence the Wuhan chaos. But there's an intent there to commit acts of evil, regardless. without that funding in place, it stops. But the bad people don't go away, do they? I mean, people like Fauci will always seem to want to inflict pain and misery, whether it's through African kids giving them AIDS to killing millions with these vaccines. I mean, it's just 3 years ago, trying to imagine something on this scale, it's just absolutely unbelievable. But once you start looking into these things, you start to realize there's so much evil in the world. Their intent to control every aspect of your life and depopulate at the same time. It's quite an intense war in the mind, which is why this strength of character, you kind of then help each others to be stronger, to actually support them, but support yourself, because it's going to need every one of us to defeat this, isn't it?
Exactly. So my question here is, yes, I can understand. I'm with you with the funding, and we've known in medicine that the pharmaceutical industry has funded, has penetrated literally all aspects of medicine since the early 20th century, and only exponentially so. But above and beyond, my question is also the role of population in this. So um, just like in other historical events that may not have been pandemic, but wars, for example, or pogroms or genocide, right?
Mhm.
The role of the everyday man and woman is considerable. And so my question, and the biggest one of the biggest anger for me, as a person that's never known a live war, a hot war in my life. So COVID was the first non-historical, real life event that was of such magnitude that I saw the description of things I had only read in history books and biography about the behavior of everyday people deputized or self-deputized to then become rulers of other people's liberty or
Mm.
rights. And as much as I had assumed this would not happen the way that it did happen before, it happened entirely. People, I don't know about the UK, but I can tell you that in France, people use the police to call on to their neighbors. To say
I
that,
saw,
to say that
I
you,
saw
you didn't
frightening
have the right
videos. Yeah.
QR code, you were out going out in the beach. Maybe you had gone and taken out your dog 3 or 4 times. And that's the
Mm.
mildest version. We had people, I mean, everybody has seen it through social media, people who were choked by police officer for allegedly not wearing the mask correctly.
Mm.
You had people being chased on the beach by police force with weapons.
Mm.
So something happened in the population level, and I fear that, generally speaking, Western population didn't really um, deliver on our values and rules about individuality, about respecting other people's bodily autonomy, respecting
Mm.
freedom of speech, and saying, well,
Mm.
I disagree with how you feel about this, but I will fight to have your right to say it
Mm.
unaffected. This is what freedom of speech stands for. It is not to defend the speech you agree with. It's to defend the speech that needs to be heard no matter. Otherwise, we don't have freedom of speech. So the value of democratic Western world, to me, seem to have been only defended by a very small minority of people. They defended really well at extreme
Mm.
cost to themselves, both in terms of losing licensing, losing jobs, losing social reputation in there, losing family members, sometimes
That's right.
getting ill, so losing tremendous things. But they were small in number. They were very small in number. And we had a huge amount of the population that shrugged their shoulder and said, well, it's not my thing. And then another group of the population that said, well, I'll help, I'm going to go out and help and make sure that you're wearing your mask correctly whatever that is,
Mm.
and that you get to tell me, whether you can get into this restaurant or not, and I will scream at you, I will chase you, sometimes I will be violent. And that is something that I really worry about, because it would have taken, not like population of the UK, I don't know if you're 65 millions, but France is right about there. If we had 1 million people in the street quietly saying, no, we don't, you can keep your QR code. No, we
Mm.
won't do that. We will not enforce that anybody takes a vaccine they don't want. You take it if you want, suit yourself, do your own research, but this is where it stops. We will not impose it. So, how do you feel about how the British population behaved?
Well, of a population of 80 million, um, at its height, we probably have 2 or 3 million. They estimate on those protests, the early ones, and those really kind of really lit a fire under everything. Um, Now, it's very complacent, very quiet. Nobody wants to create any sort of difficulty or problems. I didn't see a lot of what you saw in France with the snitching on your neighbours. Right from, see, I was working. I think we had to increase our hours to like 10 hours a day or 12 hours just to cope with the increased levels of toilet rolls coming in, because you know about that hysteria, um, and everything else. And so the hysteria I saw, amongst people in the store, I basically dealt with delivery, so I was pretty much backstage, but I did have to come into store, and it was pure craziness. The having to use the gels to. I lost a lot of people I used to know, just be friends with, just because their minds got twisted by this fear, this paranoia, this crazed way of thinking. Um, there's been a lot of talk of people wanting forgiveness, but you'll only see that from those who are probably pushing the agenda in the first place. They're the first ones saying now we should be forgiving. No, no. You inflicted such cruelty. Never. These people drove people like myself to take these poisons because of the fear that they were peddling. I'm lucky that I'm still here. I was on my way out. How I managed to keep going, I don't know. They said that to me in the hospital. I was just very lucky. But so many died. So many still dying. Look at the excess deaths figures that we're seeing worldwide because of these peddled poisons. There's going to be huge reckoning coming at some point. I don't know how it's all going to be tackled, whether it's going to be a fictional Nuremberg 2 trial that deals with it all, because when you look at the amount of people that are involved in protecting this, look at the billions pushed by the pharmaceutical industry, investing in the media to keep this campaign going. They still try it now at every opportunity. They'll fund a football player, an American football player, for several million to promote a TV advert. No names. So they're still intent on pushing that. So how do you deconstruct all of that? I mean, to answer one of your other questions I didn't answer, yes, I do blame the government. I do blame my pharmaceutical industry, AstraZeneca, for ruining my life, and so many thousands of other people that I've grown to know over the last few years. I've had contact with AstraZeneca. They promised to help me. They said that in their emails, in their communications, and I believed them initially, but it was a lie. Took me a long while to realise that. It's the same with every other government department who've been put in place to keep you quiet, basically. You can't complain about something because it doesn't exist. Oh, it's a rarity. we're baffled as to the reason why you're suddenly feeling ill, and yesterday you were fit and, healthy. There's going to be a heck of a lot of people being made accountable for all this to go away. Where does it stop? Where does it stop, really? Because, you've got your top people who run the pharmaceutical industries, the government, politicians worldwide. Then you go into the places that people were actually pushing these poisons onto people and actually giving it. Does it stop with them? Do they then make them accountable as well? Because I know World War II, you had so many people pushing such hysteria, and they basically tried the media and the medical community as well. Do we do the same now through this whole COVID nightmare? Because it has far-reaching tentacles, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. And also, we have a new actor or a new set of actors that we didn't have prior, which is all the tech company, whether it is Google, YouTube, which played a huge role in platforming and deplatforming to create this, this sort of illusion of consensus. When you eliminate the dissenting voice, of course, you're going to have consensus. I mean, so that the power of these company, whether it be Twitter before it got bought by Elon Musk, even currently in the current state, not everything comes out. And, technology is playing an incredible role of support for these, government policies and for pharmaceutical, because of course they are also co-funded by enormous amount of money coming from the same actors over and over again. So we essentially have a sort of autocracy or a form of, oligarchy of some kind, except to me anyway, it was something that was fairly invisible before, or visible in, in some fields. Maybe you assume that 40-50% of medicine is like this, but maybe there's enough that isn't, that it's still functional. Same for sort of finance, same for education. But actually, COVID and the scale of this issue and how many countries are involved and the role of sort of institution that I never even thought too much of, like WHO. I thought they were fairly benign, doing fairly benign things, overseas. And I mean, the whole implosion of the matrix is not a small metaphor for me anyway. It's upended pretty much all my understanding. It's sort of a Tiananmen Square moment for my Chinese friends who've said, well, once you live through that and you realize that you've been lied to at such a global scale, it's hard to imagine that everything else is okay. Right. So
that's right. It's just this part of society that's wrong, but everything else is fine.
Yeah, it's just not credible. Yeah, exactly. So I think we are not out of the hoods at all. I think I agree with you that the reckoning will inevitably come because we have receipts. And by we, I don't mean just you and all the victims, the immediate victims, the dead people. But we have receipt in technology, because technology doesn't go away. We have emails. We have however long it takes, and it will most definitely take a long time, providing there's not a larger scale crazy situation that comes through that then washes out this one, which is possible. I mean, it's not probable, but it's within the possibility.
Possible.
Yes, it's within the possibility.
These days, anything is possible. We say we couldn't have imagined this whole thing that's just been thrust on us now. But then you look back to a few years ago, what we really didn't think too much of was the swine flu and all the other ones. They're all part of the same process in instilling control and change. And then seeing what part of the public actually complied. It was a whole game. It was a whole test of our strength. And so many people gave into it, not as many as what they forecast. They say that so many million parts of the humanity actually can provide. But I think they lie too often, they lie too frequently, and you have to then basically look around you and see all the ones who didn't actually get caught up in it, and to actually get a better picture. This whole thing goes back to like free speech, like we were saying earlier. There's so many parts to this agenda, and it's not just the WHO controlling future lockdowns, the pandemic response in the future. It's the whole WEF, everything, right from the net zero agenda to divisions in society. I mean, there's a battle going on at the moment. I'm probably not sure if it is something you wanted to talk about, but it's all part of the free speech. Mark Stein's fighting a defamation case in Washington at the moment over a guy called Michael E. Mann, a supposed professor, supposed expert in science. His data over the last few weeks have been proven to be very flawed, very much fraudulent. And what his research has shown over the years has been adopted by anyone you could imagine who has a bit of clout, whether it be the Clintons, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, all to push that net zero climate alarmism craziness on the world. And what it's done, it's ramped up over the years because it's gone unchecked. When you've had people like Matt Stein, Rand Simberg, and a few others all actually saying, well, hang on a minute, looking at it scientifically, does it really make sense? Can we replicate this in any way? And they can't, basically, because they use theory, no actual fact. And so this whole net zero agenda has kind of been built on the web of lies, which we know anyway. So this whole freedom of speech, being able to talk about it, it's under attack. This case that's going on in DC won't be the last of them, but quite a number of people have been getting on board trying to support these guys, because if you don't have the right to talk about it, regardless of what it is, what the subject is, we're living then in an Orwellian society. Somebody has a tyrannical control over you, whether that will be through your vaccines, your freedoms, your freedom to live your life any way you wish. So it's a very important subject. And like what you say, with future pandemics being thrown at us, it's a possible. I certainly wouldn't deny that something will happen because they're talking about it already. And unless we can keep talking, we won't make change. If we don't have our governments better representative of us, i.e. having those people that actually will speak for us, we can't get change. And it's that change of power that will then defund these globalist entities like WHO. And like I said before, without that funding in place, they lose their power, lose their control over the people. And so we then start to get a freer society back, don't we?
Very well said. On this note, I will ask you the question I ask all my guests to conclude our conversation, which is, Wayne, what is your weird sauce for life, considering all the battles that you've already wedges and the future ones ahead?
It's having hope. It's a quite a small thing, but it makes such a huge difference. Something we say, or somebody else will say, can then create such a better hope of positivity. It just gives you that strength of spirit just to carry on. That's the only reason that I keep doing what I do. Because I've had people say to me, what you're doing makes a difference. I'd like to think that I can help in some way. Yeah, and other people have done the same to me. And so it's a joint thing, isn't it? Speaking together makes a difference.
As Graham Greene said, expectations too are a form of wealth. So I wish you all the hope and all the successful expectations for better health, for a better world, and for a better um, daily sort of understanding of the world that we live in, and a lot more kindness to one another than we've experienced in the past few years.
Definitely.
Wayne, thank you again for your time and for sharing with us and trusting that we will share this message with the audience, and hopefully somebody somewhere hears and understand that we are in this together, and regardless the countries, that we share this one thing together, which is pain, suffering, happiness, and consolation. So once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Florence. Thank you for having me on.
If this conversation stopped you in your track, share it with your network. You never know whose life you might change for the better. Thank you for listening. Stay curious about our next guest, and stay curious about life.